just a poor wayfaring stranger traveling through
I am ready.
this world of war.
All right, man.
There is no sickness.
And we're back.
No
Oh, we're back.
toil, nor danger.
We're back. Welcome.
We're back.
We skipped like 2 weeks?
Yeah, since the what was the last thing we talked about?
The Last of Us.
Oh yeah. That's
Like
all there is. That's
Yeah.
all there is anymore.
I mean, yeah, shit is kind of slowed to a crawl. I guess, well, we haven't made an episode in a little while, partially because we kind of kept thinking we were going to beat The Last of Us and then talk about it, and then never wound up beating The Last of Us because the game is fucking 3 eternities long. But I do. So, well, I guess I should probably do this first. Welcome back to the Infinite Scale, all 0 of you. This is we're recording this episode July 7th, 2020. Yeah, a lot has happened between when The Last of Us came out and now, not the least of which, of course, being like a lot of horrible shit coming out of the gaming industry about people who you may respect and trust being fucking weird, creepy sex perverts, which is always, of course, fucking awful. But I think like a weird extension of that has been the reaction to this video game that we're about to talk about.
That's true.
Like, it feels like people I don't want to say like unjustly are criticizing this game, because this game is very like worthy of being criticized in very key ways. But it feels like maybe the arguments are not always in good faith, I guess. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different things. Since we started playing it, I've listened to wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, that was weird. That was really weird. Sorry about that.
I'm gonna open my beer.
Yeah, I've listened to a few other podcasts and just kind of heard what other people have felt about it, and they were all non-spoiler podcasts. And now that we have finished the game, it kind of recontextualizes a lot of the things people were saying. Did it go the way that you thought it was going to?
Man, I that is a hell of a question, and I think the reason that is so hard to answer is because about like it at once can go exactly the way you think, but not how you think. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of really weird shit happens in this game. A lot of really weird shit that doesn't seem outside of the realm of possibility, but within the confines of a single story feels like really wild. Like, this game has a lot of turns and a lot of moments where you might absolutely be right in that you are going to see what's coming, but like there are many points at which we were like, yo, this game is going to do this as like a joke, and then it would, and you would be amazed just because it did it, you know?
For sure
I think
I think that what's really weird is that a lot of the discourse that I've seen has been around, I guess, what the message they were trying to get across was, which is like really weird to me, because I guess we should have said from the beginning, even though it'll probably be in the title, we're just gonna talk about all spoilers, right? We're not like holding anything back.
We are a lot of the things. We're here just as a final warning. We are here to fucking discuss The Last of Us Part 2. We finished it last night. We avoided talking to each other about it at all since then, and we are just gonna talk through our feelings about it, and no holds barred. Like, if you haven't beaten it yet, or you don't want to know what happens, then don't listen. But
I think that the game actually became more predictable as we went on, just because I don't think either of us expected there to be much choice in what you do, because you don't. It's not like you had a choice in the first one either. But with how much people discuss, like, we're discussing how the game, they think that the game is trying to make you feel bad for stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
It became apparent at a very kind of early point that it's like you're playing the game, but these are not your decisions. These are not like choices that you could really avoid in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
So that stuff, the sting of that was taken away a little bit for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess I will say that I think so there are two major opinions or discourse avenues, I guess, online about this game. One is from the like critical intellectual side of things that basically claims that this is another, well, I guess two camps that are critical of the game, right? There's a lot more nuance in the people, across the board, right? But two camps that are very highly critical of The Last of Us Part 2 are people who feel like the game was trying really hard to make you feel bad about playing it, right? Like they were trying to make you feel like you had agency in this story and that you are a bad person for seeing this through. Which I think we kind of briefly discussed as we were playing through this, but I think that's a pretty bad take.
I do too.
Yeah.
Especially given how it played out, because we felt this way even before the halfway point, I think. But as it progressed, I felt even more so that way, that it's just, there was a certain point, like I think throughout the game, you're kind of like, well, I wouldn't do this way. But there's a certain point where I think you and I both were like, there's no way that this is happening, right?
Yeah, this whole game is I wouldn't do the fucking simulator. Like every decision that you as a reasonable human being might make when given the opportunity is completely, I mean, like, okay. So we talked about it a little bit last time, but I'm just going to reset this up just so everyone is on the same page. So at the beginning of the game, you're not really given the full picture on Ellie and Joel's relationship anymore. Things seem a little bit strained early on. Ellie clearly suspects that Joel has not been upfront with her about the events taking place at the end of the previous game, in which Joel kills pretty much an entire base of Fireflies just to save Ellie's life, and essentially theoretically dooms humanity, right? Which I think at the time was an interesting thing in the first game, because it is a decision that, I mean, depending on who you are, you either were like, that's ridiculous, I definitely would not do the same, or you're like, maybe I can see where he's coming from, I think that was an interesting quandary, and it's a very realistic predicament that one might find themselves in, right? It's easy to identify with the character and see how Joel would make that decision based on how he's been written up to that point, right? And the events that have taken place. I mean, it's pretty straightforward storytelling. Like it makes sense. As a person who writes sometimes, it's easy to see they set the pieces up for that payoff to make sense.
I think I agree with you. I think that a large amount of people don't feel that way, though. Especially listening to people's perspectives, like kind of doing a retro on how they felt about the first game. Like, people feel very opposed to how things played out with Joel in general.
In the first game or in the second game?
In the first game. I guess to some degree in the second game too, but you very rarely do see people like being like, well, I kind of understand his headspace and where he was at. And I've gone on record when we've talked about this as thinking that it's so short-sighted, because you'll never, I mean, I would assume most people don't have the same perspective that he has, or like are in the same situation, like the sort of things that have happened with him in the game. It's hard to imagine somebody making perfectly rational decisions. It's just, it's always been really weird how people view what people do in The Last of Us. And this game hammers that home so much, which is something that I think it was really successful at.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's worth discussing is that depending on how you feel about that decision will vastly influence how you feel about the second game, right? And the events that take place. I think that if you are even somewhat of a complex person yourself, it should be pretty easy to see how things could play out the way that they do, right? As in the events that lead up to Joel's death in the second game. Like, I get even if you maybe could see and understand why Joel did what he did at the end of the first game, even if you can rationalize that or kind of like chalk it up to, he lost his daughter once, he's not going to do it again, right? Like shit like that. Super basic character stuff. Like even if you can, or even if you're on his side in all of this, it's still pretty easy to see how that shit will come back to bite him, right? I mean, I think that's obvious.
Absolutely.
I think what's interesting is the second major camp that criticizes this game has less to do with how the game is supposed to make you feel, and has more to do with the fact that Joel gets killed by a previously unknown character, right?
Right.
Who happens to be a woman, and her name's Abby. And I think that what's interesting about how much people hate that character is that it almost seems entirely based in like people can dress it up however they want, as a love for the character of Joel or as a desire to see the story go in a different direction. They can dress it up however they want, but in a lot of cases it feels like it really boils down to some very intense discomfort with like a woman winning in that situation.
And there's a lot of really awkward and just like embarrassing conversations on the internet about Abby that like I stopped reading after a while, because I get very like I have a hard time believing that so many people like hold these opinions, and like I actually really like Abby as a character. I didn't feel that way immediately. I was concerned about how that would be built out, but I ended up really liking her more than Ellie, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mixed emotion there, right? Early on, Abby is shown to be very single-minded and very annoying, and not naggy, but she has. I mean, that's kind of a loaded word in of itself, right? I mean, but she has like a quality to her that makes her inherently like a personality type that repels people around her, right? Like she's brutal, like in literally everything. Like she's super straightforward and honest about how she feels about something. Like she's very blunt. And it makes her come across as extremely unlikable early on, which I think is intentional, because basically Abby and Ellie have completely inverse character progressions, which is an interesting story trope for sure. Especially because they make you play them like almost simultaneously. But I think so sort of getting right into it, I guess, before we get too deep in. If I have one major criticism, is that it's that this game requires you buy into the idea that Ellie, regardless of her relationship with Joel at the moment, because they don't show you everything that's happening with them up front, right? All you see is they kind of don't trust each other for a while, and you kind of hear secondhand chatter that maybe their relationship isn't what it used to be, right? But you don't really get it. They give you those pieces periodically throughout the game. So you basically have to buy in early on that Ellie would essentially decide to walk down this really violent and like particular path. You have to buy into that, or this story is not going to work for you. I mean, she basically becomes a completely different person by the end of the game, right?
Absolutely.
Now you could see how, based on like the stuff that happened in one and some of the stuff in Left Behind, how maybe she could be pushed to this point, right? She's definitely very emotional. She's displayed like aggression and stuff like that in the past, right? But this is like a sustained level of like hatred that is like, I mean, shit, dude. Like you gotta be crazy to like let that go for that long, right? But basically, Abby tortures Joel to death, and Ellie and Dina, her new kind of quasi love interest, who also is like, they kind of imply that Dina is a bit of a love centered or centric person, right? Like, not to say that she's like, I mean, like, nothing derogatory. I think it's really just she seems to like attention, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that. Yeah.
They kind of imply that. But so they set off on a journey together to take revenge on Abby for Joel's death. And a lot of things happen along the way that, Ellie basically has a hit list of people that she's going to kill. And Tommy kind of sneaks out ahead of her and goes in advance. And I would say it's probably like 30-ish, 40% of the game that you play as just Ellie kind of getting to grips with everything.
Yeah, totally.
Like, into Seattle, you go through 3 days in Seattle as Ellie, like, just fucking running your hit list of different people, trying to track down Tommy at the same time. Jesse, who the fuck? Oh yeah, Jesse's that guy. Trying to track down Tommy at the same time. You run into Jesse, which I think we agree is like a really cool moment where he like shows up kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah,
he's the father of Dina's child and basically like a tertiary character, but he's super cool. And there's like a nice car chase scene, but yeah, I mean, I think the progression of events in this game is like super. It's probably the weakest or one of the weakest parts because it doesn't become clear what they're trying to set you up for until pretty late.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of just feel like you're like pushing through this revenge story one body at a time, right? Which doesn't really feel good, and is of course intentional. I think.
Yeah, it's odd. I think that I have issues with the progression of the story at points too. The way that it chooses to leave out things that I guess it kind of fills the blanks on. Like, I think the big one for me is like the actual ending, like the last time that they show a conversation between her and Joel where it's revealed that she was open to sort of trying to fix her relationship with him. It wasn't like, and I guess like the importance of that scene is to give you like the true, like, just a really good I don't know, like an issue that I had throughout the story was I wasn't necessarily buying how driven she was to I guess get revenge for what happened, especially considering like her status with him. And then they show that scene and you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. But I don't really like that that's at the end.
Yeah,
it was kind of weird.
That's almost the last thing that you see.
Yeah.
I think what makes it really interesting is what makes it interesting is that I guess the one thing that they are trying to do, or it seems like they're trying to do when they're doing that, is basically you keep having to guess at Ellie's motives, right? So like early on, it seems like maybe she's trying to figure out what's going on. Like we were, because they don't show any of this until much later, but we were under the assumption that she didn't know about the Firefly base and about the hospital. But that's not true.
Yeah.
Like, they reveal partway through the game that she does know and that they had a conversation about it, and it led to them basically not speaking for what seemed like kind of a while. Maybe a year or two, I guess.
And before she actually has that first encounter or the second encounter with Abby, she's aware that Abby's father was the surgeon, right?
I don't think they ever cover that.
I thought that she discovered it through her notes or something.
I don't think she knew who that was at that moment.
Okay.
But I think we discovered that, but I don't think Ellie ever knows that.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe. That's interesting. I mean, if she did, she barely commented on it. That you'd think that would be like a bigger part.
I mean, it would be better if she didn't know, given her actions later on, because I thought that was like super jarring, because I was under the impression that she found that out through like those notes that you find before that encounter. But it makes it make a little bit more sense, because the whole time what I was thinking was like, of course she went after Joel. Like that's, I mean, look at what you're doing. Like it's like the same shit.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we mean when we say that they have an inverse character progression, is that Abby basically starts the story out as single-minded, revenge focused. There's some flashbacks to her being really obsessed with finding Joel and pushing the people that she cares about around her away or putting them in danger, right? And then she gets her revenge, and then it's basically like a de-escalation from there, where she seems to feel guilty about it, maybe not about killing Joel, but kind of the path that it's taken her down, like as a person. Like her friends seem to treat her differently because of it. I think maybe more specifically, like everybody on her squad seems to agree that Joel should die, but I think perhaps they disagree on the method, because she did make it very unfun for him. And so it's you kind of see Abby dealing with this turmoil, and then over the span of the story, from Abby's perspective, she just basically becomes a better person, like top to bottom. Like she lets that stuff go. She tries to go back to her normal. She can't really live with herself. She still loves Owen, but doesn't want to admit it, I guess, because he's moved on, sort of, at least she thinks. And there's like an awkward sex scene about that.
Her stuff got so interesting at that point that I was literally starting to forget about the Ellie situation. Just because her individual kind of arc in this game, for a lot of it, is actually happening like unrelated to Ellie entirely. Like some of that stuff just has nothing to do with the other plot of the story. I don't know.
I mean, you Ellie, so you play, like we said, you play through like 30 to 40% of the game as Ellie, and then at a certain point you actually just wind up taking over as Abby, and you play through almost the rest of the game as Abby.
Almost,
which is a pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting just how far it goes with that, because you basically, it starts with some flashbacks to her early life. Her father's the surgeon, blah blah blah, all that stuff. That's kind of where they reveal that, if you hadn't already picked up on it earlier, they very directly reveal that to the player. And then from there, you sort of carry through the same timeline of events, but from Abby's perspective. So like Seattle day 1, 2, and 3, where you were playing as Ellie before, now you're playing as Abby, and how she got up to that point. And it's basically like the Ellie version of those events is like a descent into madness, right? It's like Dante's Inferno. Like she's like completely obsessed, pushing away people who care about her, endangering people who care about her. And it sort of culminates in like, all these bodies on her hands, and a moment in which she kills 2 people who, were just trying to protect themselves, and one of whom was pregnant, right? Mel, Owen's girlfriend. Right. Upon realizing that, she kind of has like a bit of a breakdown, it seems like. And, there's like a moment where her and Abby clash, like come together. Jesse is fucking shot, which is the quickest. It's like a Tarantino death. Like you have to wonder, did he actually just die right there? Because that was pretty easy.
That was very shocking.
And during this clash between Abby and Ellie, it switches perspectives, and then you pick up as Abby and you play through everything, and you do the day 1, 2, 3 Seattle thing. It's like a totally different thing for Abby. It's basically her like feeling bad about what she did, coming to terms with it, and then deciding to be better by helping 2 people that she doesn't have to, right?
Yeah, you get you start to learn about the scars, or seraphites, which is like the most prominent, like, I guess, other faction in the game. And it's super interesting. That was my favorite like story arc in the game, honestly. I like all of it, but I really enjoyed that. Almost felt like it was its own game.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean,
yeah,
it kind of was its own game because it takes a while to really intersect with the Ellie situation.
yeah,
Um, there this is a long fucking game. I think we probably at the end clocked in over 30 hours.
yeah.
Um,
That's nuts.
like maybe like 33 to 35, and um, you know, a lot of that is being played as Abby, where you're not really related to the Ellie story at all. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, at least obviously they didn't have to do all this stuff. In fact, I think maybe a lot of people, or not a lot, some people would argue it was unnecessary. I could see why they might feel that way. Like you didn't need to go into all of this backstory to make this work, right? But they chose to. And
Yeah.
I think it pays off for me because it takes me from, I mean, still not liking Abby at the beginning and not really wanting to be playing as her, to liking her because of the interaction she has with people that she cares about and her friends, and Manny's cool, and all this stuff. And then you know delving into her relationship with Owen and how weird and wishy-washy everything is for her, and then rescuing Yara and Lev, and you know, kind of the path that takes her down. Her and Lev grow really close on a kind of a short journey that they have together. And I mean, that scene, maybe not the most fun in terms of like a gameplay perspective. But I mean, we talked about this at the moment, like from a dialogue perspective, like those two characters becoming familiar with each other is like the best part of the whole game.
Yeah, it was it kind of harkened back to the some of the feelings in the first game, like conversations between Joel and Ellie. Joel, being from the old world when things were, Ellie was born during the apocalypse, so they had
Yeah.
kind of very similar conversations about things that like Ellie didn't understand from like the old world or whatever.
Yeah.
I seem to remember that being the case. I don't know if that's entirely true. I watched somebody play the first one so long ago, but I feel like they had very similar conversations
Yeah.
to Lev and Abby.
I would agree, and I think that I think the thing that makes it more interesting is like the ways in which those conversations are different, which is that Lev and Abby both were born after the apocalypse, but the difference is that Abby has experienced a bit more of the world through the lens of like regular people, whereas like Lev has been in a highly kind of religious cult that's segregated from the rest of the world by choice. Like they isolate themselves, they don't use technology, so there's just a lot of things that she doesn't understand purely because of her being a Seraphite, right? Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean they're as a cult, they're pretty believable because I mean the wolves want you to think that they're completely insane, but in reality, it just kind of seems like they just have faith in something higher than themselves, which is probably pretty hard to maintain in a world like that, right?
For
Um,
sure.
like they don't really seem that crazy outside of like the scars thing. Like cutting scars in their own faces is a little bit unusual, I'll have to admit. Um Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that aspect of all this, and this became really like apparent towards the end. I genuinely feel like the lore of the factions is somewhat underdeveloped unless, well, you were reading like every note, and maybe that is like where the majority of those explanations are at. But I personally didn't think that was enough,
Yeah.
because especially of that last faction, what are they called? Like the Rattlers.
Yeah, the
I
Rattlers.
I don't even think that they needed to have like a name that people associate with them, because
Yeah.
we get some stuff about what their culture's like, but for the most part they just like torture people in really odd ways that it's really like underdeveloped. And it's kind of the same for the Seraphites, but to a lesser degree, because you do get those notes. But like I was hoping and also kind of expecting for that stuff to be developed within the story, and not, you wouldn't have to find out about them through like notes that you find.
Yeah. I agree. I think some of that is intentional. Like I think that you only view those factions and understand those factions from the information that you're given, both
Mhm.
as a player and as a character, right? So like as Abby as a character blatantly just believes that the wolves are better, right, than the Seraphites, or the Scars as she calls them. And they just constantly refer to the Scars as lunatics and crazy and weirdos and freaks and all this stuff. And it's really just a lack of understanding. Like, I don't think that either faction understands what the other one is about, really, and maybe not even understand what their own shit is about anymore, right? Like, they're just in a war for basically the sake of being at war. It seems like, just because they don't feel like they can get along, or they feel like they're diametrically opposed. I think what's interesting is that from an outsider's perspective, it's pretty easy to see how they're both just being stupid.
Yeah.
But that's how wars are, right? Like, wars pretty rarely in the real world over the years, like just looking back over the course of history, feel wholly justified when you look back, right? And I think that's kind of what's happening here. Is like, as an outsider, as Ellie, you come in, you read these notes, you see these people talking just total shit about each other, and you just kind of like are just like, okay, whatever. I mean, they both seem equally bad and good, right? I mean, they're good for the people who are in those factions, and it's a greater kind of umbrella for the rest of the game, right? It's like Ellie and Abby both hate each other and refuse to see things from each other's perspective, right? And that leads to just real fucking suffering and bloodshed from minute one. So
yeah, and you brought up a point that I think is really important to all this, is that the flashback shows that Abby was present directly after her father, who was the surgeon. Like, her father is, I think, the first person that Joel kills at the beginning of that kind of like massacre of the Fireflies. And you, in the first game, obviously you don't even think about it, because they built that out for this game. But it was a really interesting way for them to go, and you get that context that Abby was there to say, like, if it was me, I would want them to go through with it so that we can like save humanity or whatever.
Yeah.
And her father, who's the surgeon, is also arguing that this is like super important. But you get what was the other character's name? I can't remember. She's the woman that I believe is like when you first meet Ellie and The Last of Us. I can't remember.
Nadine.
Okay, yeah, they're kind of in this argument about what they should do, and the point that you brought up was like, oh, everybody should have just had a conversation about this.
Yeah.
Ideally, but what's weird about that is like these games very much so feel like a failure to communicate. Like every conflict, like at its head, no matter how like complex it gets, whether it be like the revenge or the wars between the factions, is like this complete failure to communicate.
Yeah.
But then you get little glimpses of what it would be like if these people, there's probably a world where Abby and Ellie would have really gotten along.
Yeah.
You get the sense that they are actually probably very like-minded. But because of just all these weird ways that things played out, these people hate each other,
Yeah, and I think what makes it especially interesting is that, like you said, like they had they just asked Ellie what she wanted, I think that a lot of this would have proceeded differently, right? Like she expresses a desire to have her life have meaning. And to her, that means potentially dying on that table and delivering the cure to humanity. And she says that to Joel, that she could never forgive him. That's the last kind of cutscene you see of them together, presented at the end of the game, which actually took place the night fucking before his death. Which is that they're finally reconciling, and she says, "I don't think I can ever forgive you for taking my purpose away, but I would like to try." Kind of signaling that she might want to re-invite him into her life or whatever.
And I think it's pretty obvious that when Joel was doing what he was doing, there probably was some sort of thought of like, oh, we could like talk to her about this. But based on how things play out, it feels very obvious to me that he wasn't like taking away her choice to do this. He knew that she would, and that kind of makes his actions a little bit more grave, I guess, in the eyes of some people. I mean, in my eyes too, but it's such a complex, weird thing. But like it wasn't necessarily that he was taking her choice away. It was that he was making the choice for her.
Right. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that, it shows like other parts of their relationship that are strained through them, Joel kind of feeling like he knows what's best, right? Which is just,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just who he is. Like he's an old man. He thinks he's seen a lot, he thinks he kind of knows what the world is, and he feels like he knows best. And that was a major part of the first game too, is them butting heads on what's best, right?
He's dealing with trauma. He's dealing with a lot of things that like people don't act rationally when they're dealing with that stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like baggage of that character that he transfers on to Ellie, and is probably formative for her and why she is how she is in this game. A lot of the stuff that she does is, her reasoning is that it's revenge, but you get the sense that this is just how this person has developed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a moment where he says like, she's mad about what he did, and he starts the sentence by saying, "If God gave me another chance," and part of you feels like he might say he would do it differently, but deep down that's not the case, and he doesn't. Like I thought maybe he was gonna lie to her and say I would do it differently if I could, but he doesn't. Mm-hmm. He doubles down, and I think that's part of why they wind up kind of on the mend, like repairing things, because she respects that honesty. Like he, just because of who he is, that was the decision he made, right?
Yeah.
That's true to his character. He wasn't going to make a different decision. And I think that's pretty interesting that they chose to reveal that at the fucking end of the game. Which is like, I mean, to me, the emotional center of that game comes in like the last 2 hours, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I mean, you kind of just fight through a lot of bullshit. There's, you play through, I mean, they're basically just, you play through as Ellie and you do all the horrible shit to Abby's friends. Abby, has a lot of horrible shit happen to her during that portion. Like, she has to discover Owen and Mel being killed by Ellie. She has to deal with the whole Lev and Yara situation, helping them. She gets captured once, and escapes with the help of them, helps them, feels guilty about leaving them behind, goes back to help them again. Yara is going to lose her arm. All this like wild shit that she has to go through, which is, really interesting stuff, but doesn't really serve the overall message or narrative of the game that well. It's just sort of building Abby up as like trying to be a better person. It's not really until you go to the island that the game kind of really picks up in a like emotional kind of way. Like you get to the island, you're looking for Lev because he by shaving his head, which was against the rules of being a female in the Seraphites, he shaved his head because he's having kind of an identity crisis, because he identifies himself as a he, but biologically he is a she, and he shaves his head as an act of defiance, and he's worried that his mother will pay the price in the cult for him being that way. So he goes back to attempt to repair that relationship, and it does not go well. I think gameplay wise, the game has gotten stale long before this, but it does start to pick up a little bit during during this part. But narratively, it's definitely the most interesting part.
Yeah, because the game has a lot of looting and a lot of exploring and doing all this stuff in between story beats. And in other games, maybe in a different presentation, that would be good. But a lot of that stuff, I mean, this is even coming from somebody who was like watching you play it and not having to suffer through it. So you have a completely different perspective. And I think that this will be the case for a lot of moments in the game where you probably felt strained because you had to play through it, but I feel a certain way because of like how it came off more so. But with this, even watching it, it's just like there's so much there's so much time where you are just exploring stuff that is not necessarily interesting. There are some interesting things. I thought the little story of the bank vault was really cool.
Yeah.
But sometimes like the little puzzles, I was just like, I was completely disconnecting. But I don't know. Did you feel like the game used that time well, or did you feel like it kind of slogged a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a game, the individual mechanics of like the actual gameplay, like the looting and the shooting and the stealthing and whatever, all work pretty flawlessly for what they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
It's when they try. I mean, well, one, you repeat those same encounters in different environments like 100 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're just basically doing the same shit over and over again. Kill a bunch of people or you know, infected, loot their bodies, and then move on through a series of corridors that are designed for you to explore around and loot more, and ambient dialogue to occur where you learn more about the world or the characters or whatever, pick up some notes, you know, find a safe combination, all that stuff. And I have problems, so I am very methodical with that stuff. I'm sure it was fucking painful for you to watch, but I'm like, I'll circle back around and check the same dark corner 3 times just to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Well, you have to, because you'll have different combat experiences where you're like, oh, I wish I had this at this time, or I wish this or that. So
Yeah.
I think that factors into you wanting to get all of that stuff. It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I think one thing worth kind of hitting on at this point when we're talking about like combat and stuff is, do you think that the name calling out kind of thing, because it's been sort of a meme, everybody's been talking about this, like
Yeah.
the way that the enemies call out, the human enemies call out each other's names, did you find that it was like effective in humanizing them, or like what?
I mean, it's definitely fun. Like it's a cool.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. It's like an interesting thing for a video game to do, right? Like I don't recall video games doing that before now, but I found it. I mean, I think you'll agree. I found it pretty funny, honestly. Like you blow a guy's leg off and he screams and dies in horrible fucking 4K agony, and you know somebody off camera goes, "Evan," you go, "Yeah, Evan, fuck you." Like it's, you know, it's not. I think they're trying to make you feel like you just harmed a person, but like
Exactly.
like
That's definitely what they want.
yeah, I think because of the context, it doesn't work. One, because it's a video game. Two, because we've been trained that, you know, from a narrative perspective, Ellie believes these people are not people; they're monsters, right? Like they're the enemy. So
Right. So
I
it
mean,
makes no difference when you hear their names. It's
yeah,
it's a very hollow way of like trying to get you to empathize with people that the character you are making able to do this doesn't care. Like she doesn't.
yeah,
They don't care. If it never matters to the characters in the game, I think it's kind of hard for it to matter to me. I don't know if that's a weird logic with it, but
yeah.
it's, you know,
Well,
I try to view it the same way I view movies. If they're going to do this thing where you are just the mechanism that the story is going to play out no matter what you do, like if you keep playing, it's just going to play out this certain way. For me, my brain goes into kind of like movie mode. It's like, okay, I'm not doing this. I'm
Yeah.
just this person. Like, you know, it's not me that's like choosing to do crazy shit. Whereas like in an RPG, I might feel a little bit, or like even like an immersive sim, I might feel more inclined to do things how I would choose to do them in real life. But you're not given that option, so
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think they're so. And I mean, this is really hard because, you know, I've heard like Brad at Giant Bomb or different people around the internet say it's hard to witness or do this stuff as the player because it is difficult to look at or difficult to partake in. And the thing I keep coming back to is just, this is fiction. Like, I mean, like maybe I mean, I consider myself a pretty empathetic person. But there's something about the way that it works in this game that just does not make me feel the way that other people seem to think that this game is trying to make you feel, right? Like it's trying to make you feel like a sick person for doing this to these people. I am just playing through Ellie's story. Ellie is the person doing these things. Ellie is the driver of this narrative. I'm just along for the ride and to point and shoot, right? To determine how successful she is in her endeavors, but she is the one making the decisions. So to me, it's I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like I treat it just like I would treat a movie. Like I mean, in an action movie like The Raid, a guy gets his fucking head blown off, and I'm like, holy shit, that was badass. Like that's exactly how I felt in this. Like I fucking, that guy cowered in fear of me. That rattlesnake or rattler cowered in fear of me at the end of the game, said, you don't have to do this. You don't have to shoot me. And I made a point to take my shotgun out so I could blow multiple of his limbs off in one blast because it fucking looks awesome. Like that shit is so rad. And I mean if the game was trying to make me feel bad about doing those things, then it fucking failed categorically. Like
I think that the areas where it's effective are the same areas where the stuff is like most effective in movies. I guess I should clarify. I don't think that this is like something that was bad for them to do. I just think that it wasn't. If they were hoping that this was like a really big way to like get empathy or get feelings of just like not like not regret, but just like get you to feel more for like the situations you're in with combat. I don't think that it's anywhere near as effective as the way that they do it in the story beats.
Yeah.
Just because like you need I think for that stuff to work, it can't just be people like calling out each other's names and stuff. You need to have situations that you're presented with that genuinely make you like they need to be a little bit more complex than that. And then maybe we could start having like a conversation about if games are like getting really good at that.
Yeah.
I think it's an okay attempt. It's just that it didn't quite have the impact that maybe other people feel like it did. For me at least, watching it. And it's different for me because you're playing through it. You're playing it, and I'm sure that there's multiple points where like you're thinking, oh, I don't want to do this way. For me, watching it, it's just like, of course Ellie did that. Like she in the scenes that you have no control over that aren't even like gameplay, she does like horrible stuff that you're just like, of course she's not gonna like it would be weird. It would be like out of character. It's totally. I don't know.
And I think you're right in that narratively the game presents you with a lot of situations that you feel bad about just because you have grown. I mean, like, you mentioned that you grew to dislike Ellie over time, and maybe like Abby more. And I think by the end of the game, they're at an even keel, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like they've kind of evened out. They're both pretty neutral characters. They both have things about them that are likable and dislikable. When you stop playing as Abby, the way that they did it was pretty interesting. I mean, they make you have a boss fight with Ellie as Abby, right? Which was pretty thrilling, but also very frustrating from like just a game design perspective. Like the way the AI works. I get what they were trying to do by making Ellie very like stalker-ish. Like they were playing Ellie the way they want you to play Ellie, right? Mm-hmm. But it only works to a point, and it got kind of annoying. But and so, they pull at your heartstrings in very obvious ways throughout the game, like making you empathize with both sides and then taking things away from them. When you kill Owen and Mel as Ellie earlier in the game, you don't feel nearly as much when near the end of the game when you discover their dead bodies as Abby, right?
For sure.
Like, the shit that they're pulling is like narrative 101. It's super basic shit, but the way that it's structured and the way that it's laid out in the game makes it extremely effective, right?
It's more challenging as a game than as a movie. This is something that doesn't. I mean, you're more of like the video game historian than I am. I'm sure there's probably several examples of people trying to do this, but for me, like with the games I've played, I thought that this was a pretty unique take with it when you have like control over multiple characters in a story.
I mean, they were really just driving the message home, right? They wanted to get their message across, and they were going to beat your face into it. And I think so. Gameplay wise, I think this game is very tight and well put together, but suffers from a lot of repetition. And I mean, by our by hour 18 to 20, I was ready for it to be over, only to have almost 10 more hours to go, right? So or maybe even over 10 hours, depending on how methodical you are. And that's bad. That's, I think, bad pacing, bad game design. From a gameplay perspective, they could have cut out a lot of those encounters and you would still feel like you got your money's worth, right? Like, I just think that there was issue there. From a narrative standpoint, I think what they're trying to do, while like very pretty transparent and pretty obvious, was effective. And nothing,
absolutely.
nothing more so than when you get later on in the game, you do that boss fight as Abby, and then there's like a time jump. And then you're Ellie on the farm.
Yeah, that scene, people have been regarding that sort of mid-game, where you get to this point where it could very easily be the end. In most games, this would be the end.
Yeah, there are like 10 different parts of this game where you kind of think it's going to end, and then it doesn't.
Oh yeah, and I think that has to be by design, and I think I think it's super effective. Like, you know, when you get to that farm scene where after you've had this like encounter, you were playing as Abby fighting against Ellie, and Abby wins that fight and chooses to allow Ellie to live, not necessarily without the influence of Lev. Lev kind of there at the right moment to, I don't know, like, I guess we kind of glazed over that. Do you feel like in Lev's absence that would have played out differently?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Lev's absence would change the entire course of the story, right? In a lot of different ways. But like, if Lev had died during the island assault where the wolves attacked the Seraphites, I think that Abby would have killed Ellie right there.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Although I think what's really important about the dynamic between Ellie and Abby is that, you know, we can say all these good things about like Abby's development, but at the end of the day, she was able to get her revenge before she lost her friends, right?
Yeah.
Like the lead up to her killing Joel, actually, despite having like some kind of like hiccups, she hadn't really lost anybody important to her at that point. So like the big
dad, right?
Yeah, exactly. So she gets the revenge that she's looking for. But I think that since the game is overall just about like the cyclical nature of revenge and how it's not going to just be this like easy thing. You know, the whole game is her having to deal with the fact that she like allowed Ellie to live in the first place. And for her to like allow Ellie to live like a second time, it's a very like interesting way for things to play out before that dream that dreamy feeling sequence after.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mean, it presents an interesting comparison between Abby and Ellie, because I don't think Ellie would have done the same thing in that situation, right?
Right.
So they're really trying to kind of sell you on the idea that Abby has sort of begun to see the error of her thinking prior to now, right? Yeah, so then you have that sequence that kind of seems like it's a dream sequence, where Ellie and Dina a year later are like living happily ever after on a farm. Except it's not happily ever after. Clearly, Ellie has some issues, like PTSD, perhaps, just guilt, and
she doesn't feel like she carried out what she was set out to do.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of influenced by Tommy, which I think you and I both felt was kind of a little bit jarring, because during that last encounter that he has with Abby, she shoots his eye out, right? Like she shoots it. It was really quick. Like I thought at first that she shot him in the back, but he's missing an eye in this part, right?
Yeah,
or like his eyes kind of like glazed over. I couldn't tell what happened there.
It seems like he got shot in the leg and the head. Like they kind of almost try to imply that Tommy is dead. They like imply by not really like going over it again. Like Tommy is clearly shot in the face somewhere, but they don't really go into it at all. and then they treat it as like a reveal that Tommy is alive. They kind of just want you to assume Tommy is dead based on where he was shot, but in reality, it seems like he just lost his eye. Which I mean,
and he's pretty very pushy about like carrying the story forward.
Yeah. I will say, I think the moment in which I like was walking up to the house and saw a horse sitting outside the house and was just like, oh, there's Tommy. Like,
yeah,
pretty funny. Like they really don't. I think that's the funny thing about this game is that the shit that you're like joking about that is like obvious, that would be like a trope that somebody would pick on, is like the route that they take. They just fucking really bury the hatchet. Like they're fucking driving it home. But yeah, so Tommy's alive and weirdly enough is fucking itching for revenge.
Yeah, because he didn't feel that way like immediately after his brother died.
No.
And it kind of I felt kind of like gaslighted by this in a way, because I was starting to like think that maybe I interpreted how his behavior was at the beginning of the game differently, because at the beginning what it seems like is like he is in the same mindset as Ellie, but he's kind of listing the reasons like why they can't really do this, and like he talks about how like if more people leave Jackson, then they're kind of like open to being attacked and stuff. Like he's not necessarily like against Abby going out and getting like this revenge, but he definitely seems to be like he's not like seeing red, you know? And in this scene, it's like a different person.
Yeah. It's something that I wish that got a little bit more development. Like I wish there needs to be a DLC where you play as Tommy or something. Even though I think they said that there won't be any DLC for this game, but like I just there's so much about his character that is unexplored.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, for better and worse, right? But like, yeah, this sort of seems like it comes out of nowhere. I mean, it's easy to say that now he's lost to Abby twice and really just hates her. Like he has a personal vendetta now. His brother got killed by her, and then he tried to take revenge and failed. Like, you know, it's pretty easy to see how maybe he's upset by that. I mean, he's clearly more of a stone cold killer than we gave him credit for. He fucking guns a lot of people down and tortures a lot of people throughout while we're trying to find him in Seattle. Like that moment where you're playing as Abby, and I was like, there's like a sniper that you run up against at the marina, and there was like a second there where I was like, fuck, do you think this is Tommy? And then it turned out to be him. Like shit like that is really well done, and Manny fucking doesn't even see what shot him, which is pretty wild. Like there's a lot of really good moments showing just how efficient and brutal Tommy is when given the, you know, the tools and the drive, right? So I don't think it's like a huge character leap, but it does feel like Tommy always came across as like the softer brother of the two. And for him to be completely just fucking angry that Ellie doesn't want to go and get revenge anymore is like really weird.
Well, and I guess the other thing with that too is that by the time Ellie makes her decision to leave this sort of like idealized life that she was talking with Dina about earlier on, like they get this like farm that they had been talking about earlier on in the game, and she seems to, you know, every visual in this game is very like gloomy and like overgrown cities and very like really like gloomy stuff. And then this scene is like it doesn't look real. It's so bright, and it doesn't even look like they're on the same planet. Like it's nuts. So and they do that on purpose because they really want to like, I think that they wanted it to have like this surreal quality now that she has this sort of like life with Dina. But like the point that I'm trying to get at is that I don't necessarily think that Tommy was like the big driving force for her to do this. It's not like she was leaving like it's not like she was talking about like, oh well, I made a promise to him, like he says like as he's leaving, he's like oh, she like promised me that she would do this and all this shit. Like that doesn't really seem why she leaves. It seems like she's in the same headspace of like she can't stop thinking about how she didn't kill Abby, like how she, you know, she keeps thinking about Joel and just like how she didn't carry through what she wanted to do, which I guess could have been kickstarted by him, but it kind of seems like it was just always there, you know?
She even tries to kind of like pick Dina's wounds a little bit about how Abby also killed Jesse.
Yeah.
Like she brings up how are you okay with that? And Dina's like, I just have moved on. You know what I mean? Like she just
Mm-hmm.
it's just something that happened, right? It's something that happened and it's in the past, and I mean you can only move forward. You can't dwell on it. And I think that's kind of the big thing is like these people dwell on these things until it becomes like a ruinous self-destruction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I think the guilt trip from Tommy is like a small factor of it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely an internal driving force that she just can't seem to let it go.
Yeah.
And so Ellie, there's like a scene where she like fucking wakes up in the middle of the night, packs her shit, and dips the fuck out. And Dina is like, I won't be here. Like I'm like, we're not doing this. If you're gonna play that game, then we are not together.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie's just like, that's up to you, and then fucking leaves.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really seem like it's pretty clear how long she's gone. But if one is to assume they're in the Midwest, it probably takes her at least a month to get to California on horseback, right?
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about that time span also. Because Dina is like, what am I supposed to do all this time? Just like wonder if you're dead for all these like months that you're going to be gone. And it's like
Yeah.
such a valid point. It's like
Yeah.
it's it's really interesting because when people talk about how the game changes at this point and how it just like, despite feeling like an ending, you're just continuing on in this very like mean spirited kind of mission to kill Abby as you originally intended. It's, it's the same thing that happened with Joel. It's like it's a different context and it's a different way that things play out. But like I feel like people should be talking more about Ellie than about like the game just like being longer at this part. Like people keep putting it in the context of them having to do something that they don't want to. But it's the same shit as the ending of the first game. Like except it's longer. You're doing something that you like really don't agree with this time. Like
Yeah.
why would anybody leave this sort of life behind? You escaped with your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah, this is definitely the point in which the I wouldn't fucking do this simulator 2K20 like ramps up to 11. Like
Yeah,
there are so many moments where you're just like, Ellie, why the fuck? Like why are you doing this? Like why are
yeah,
you inviting this much more suffering into your life? And I mean, yeah, I think that I don't see or understand or really logically comprehend where she's coming from, but she chooses anyway, right, to go after Abby again.
hmm
Um, she hears that she's in California, so she takes a trip out there, and then it's a big cut to Abby and Lev now a year later, also kind of just living their life, right?
hmm
Looking for the fireflies like Owen would have wanted, and maybe potentially even finding them. They leave that ambiguous at the end of the game, but they do
hmm
seem to radio contact with somebody who claims to be in the fireflies.
yeah,
Um, and upon learning maybe what's going on, they go to leave a building that they're in and get ambushed and captured by the rattlesnakes or the rattlers. I keep calling them the rattlesnakes. Um,
tunnel
rattlesnakes,
snakes.
yeah, rattlesnakes rule. Um, and that's kind of how the rattlers come across. Also, is like, meh, like bullies. Like they're kind of lame.
They're
Um,
it's honestly like I think that they just I think that naming them is the part that bothers me because they really
yeah,
there's nothing necessarily organized about them on face value. Like again, this is
yeah,
a thing where like maybe if you were able to explore their lore maybe, but they just seem like sadistic, like weird, like they're like biker people. I don't
yeah.
understand what they were trying to get across with these people. I think that they just would have been better as being like just delinquent people that have like banded together. They don't really have like an ideology. They're just fucking crazy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. They just seem like a biker gang that went big, basically.
Which maybe is why Rattler is their name, but
Yeah,
I don't know. It was weird to
yeah.
me.
They make them out to be a bigger thing than they really are.
Yeah.
For sure. And yeah, so as Ellie, you kind of you know, you take over as Ellie, who has found the ship that Abby and Lev have been staying in. It's Owen's sailboat from the aquarium, and you're tracking them. Right, you move through some neighborhoods, and you accidentally fall into a trap, which is like a really cool scene, where she gets injured, like she swings into a tree, and a tree like branch that's been broken off and sharpened like stabs her in the fucking like kidney or something. Um, and yeah, she's injured and passes out, and two rattlers come up to like capture her, which I think they're the same guys who captured Abby and Lev as
Yeah,
well.
it was the same people.
And that's kind of a fun little thing. And Ellie basically outsmarts them pretty brutally. Like they're the offends one of them, and he's like gonna feed her to a nearby clicker who's caught in a trap, and she like gets bitten and doesn't give a fuck because she won't get infected. And lets him get fucking fed to the clicker, and then mows the other guy down with that guy's gun. It's like a really cool scene. It's maybe one of my favorites.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
It's sad that it comes so late in the game when you're so fucking ready to be done with it, because it's just like something that you're like maybe not a lot of people will remember when thinking back across it, because it just sort of happens. But
Yeah. Do you kind of feel like maybe this group, it would have been better served for them to have been like whatever was left of the wolves, like tracking down Abby after like what she did, like how she's basically like responsible for Isaac's death and stuff, like just to like add more to that group rather than having this sort of random like underdeveloped like kind of faction show up late in the game?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I guess the thing that it's trying to show is that just factions are like so fucking weird and fleeting and temporary. Like the Wolves and the Seraphites fucking ground each other into a fine dust in Seattle, right? Like it doesn't seem like the Wolves were organized enough post Isaac's death, and there were enough people even left alive for them to really go on an expedition. So yeah, I mean, maybe if things had played out slightly differently in the invasion, it would have been cool to kind of continue that narrative. But I mean, yeah, I agree that the Rattlers come out of nowhere and get almost no development and feel really strange and out of place. But there's also like not really enough wolves left, maybe, to seem like they would be a threat either. So, it's weird. I mean, the whole game is there are moments that definitely feel like they sort of just threw something in because they're like, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? You know, unless that they really contextualized it in the narrative. They sort of half-assedly mentioned that a lot of people think Santa Barbara is haunted for some reason. Well, like,
oh yeah,
like what? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. I completely forgot about
like,
that.
What? Okay, you're just giving us a reason that like there are a shit ton of infected there because nobody goes through there because it's a superstition. Like, is that it? Like, okay. Sure, I guess. Like they just sort of throw shit in for fun.
The reason that stuff works in like RPGs, or like I guess like Fallout would be my example, is because if you choose to, like those are my favorite parts of the Fallout games, is when you hear about something like weird and then you like it turns out to be like a side quest or like some like weird shit that you can like learn about. With a game like this where you don't have the ability to learn about that stuff, I do agree that it is like good when a story creates like questions. But with this, it's like stuff that you know will never be answered. Like it's stuff that like you, as soon as you see it and you know that, you know, I guess there's like 10 minutes left in the game, it's just like, well, now I'll never know why people think Santa Barbara is haunted. It's just like weird shit like that I don't know, like they're not gonna go into that stuff in the next game if they make one.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I mean, and then like some of that random shit gets like covered in notes sometimes, maybe, or whatever, but not to like a satisfying degree where you're like, okay, I get it now. You know, it's just it's a weird fucking thing. But yeah. So you play as Ellie for a bit again, you know, doing the usual rigmarole, killing infected, killing humans, whatever. You blast through the entirety of the rattlesnake space, and yeah, fuck, god damn it, tunnel snakes. And then you you free their basically you kind of discover that they've been enslaving people to do manual labor for them, um and maybe intentionally turning them infected just to like make them suffer.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's pretty weird. They don't really get into it a lot, but they kind of imply that. And then you let a bunch of their slaves free, a bunch of their prisoners free. And Ellie asks the other prisoners where Abby is, and they tell her that she's on the pillars. And it turns out they've just been fucking brutally, like, basically crucifying people, like suspending them from giant pillars of wood for days
Mhm.
on end, letting them starve to death and roast in the sun.
It's
And
especially apparent for Lev because she's the most jacked character in the game, and then at this
or
point,
you mean Abby?
she is like, or Abby, sorry. Who did I say?
You said Lev. It'd be really funny if
Oh,
Lev was the most jacked character. Imagine Lev with Abby's arms.
yeah. And I also misgendered Lev, so it's a double fuck up
Oh,
on my part.
damn!
My bad. I'm
You're
so
not an
sorry.
ally, man.
I'm totally an ally. I meant Abby. Yes,
Yeah.
Abby is like jacked throughout the game, and here she is like scrawny and just like incredibly skinny, which is like at this point, if if you haven't like decided like how you feel about how the game is playing out, I think that this is like the one of the most pathetic, like,
Yeah.
it's so like, what at this point I kind of felt like maybe Ellie would like just be like, okay, never mind, I'm done, or
Yeah.
just whatever. Like, I thought that this would be like her moment where she's just like, this isn't like the fight I was looking for.
Yeah.
But then when it continues on and she like decides that she is going to like get into this with Abby, I was just like, this is the most pathetic shit ever. Like,
Yeah.
she's beat you twice, and you can only, now you're fighting at her at like her lowest point, right? Like, there's no satisfaction you could get from this, which is what I think that they were doing maybe with how it plays out. I don't know. I don't know if you feel differently about that, but like, she
Yeah.
had to realize that this is like not the fight she was looking for.
Totally. I think yeah. So you let Abby down from her torture, and she lets Lev down.
Yeah.
And at one point earlier, one of the Rattlers let's kind of hint that um, Abby and Lev have been captured now for months. Like,
Hmm.
they've been subjected to God knows what for months. They've been manual laborers. Like, they are not in a good place.
Hmm.
And when you discover them on the pillars, it's pretty clear. Lev seems maybe dead. I mean, he doesn't seem responsive in any capacity.
Hmm.
Abby is clearly malnourished. She looks fucking gaunt, and like they shaved her head. She looks bad.
Hmm.
They've like beaten the fuck out of her. And for Ellie to decide that now is the time to fight is a really, really revealing character moment for sure. Um,
Hmm. The
and they
whole
make
game has been revealing character moments for
yeah,
her. This is like them hitting you in the head with it,
yeah,
you know?
no, it's true, it's true. And I think the thing that gets even more interesting is like they make you play it, right? You have to play this boss fight out, and it's not
Yeah.
difficult even in the slightest. Like, they've had pretty annoying boss fights up till now,
Hmm.
multiple of them that were like
Yeah.
not that fun to play because they were maybe not challenging, but just like, I mean, maybe a one hit kill or whatever. Um, and this is not challenging. It's pretty clear that Abby is in no position to be fighting. Ellie also relatively injured, but has the upper hand, has weaponry, all this stuff, and yeah, when she chooses to fight, you're kind of just at wit's end. You're like, dude, what the fuck? Um, and yeah, and then in the end, you think she's gonna drown Abby, and she doesn't. She lets her go.
Yeah.
Ellie decides, kind of at the last second that it's not really worth it. Like,
Hmm.
she's gonna try to be better, like starting now, right? Um,
Hmm.
and let's Abby go. Abby and Lev drive off on their tiny boat, maybe in the direction of where they think the fireflies are, and Ellie goes back to an empty farmhouse.
Yeah.
Uh, which is like feels pretty melancholic as far as like a character ending for sure.
Hmm. And
Um,
she leaves the guitar behind after. I mean, we didn't mention that Ellie loses 2 fingers in this
yeah,
encounter.
true. Abby bites Ellie's 2 fingers off, like her pinky and her ring finger on one hand. I think her left
So your
hand.
last, yeah, and your last act in the game is trying to play this song despite not being able to because you need more than 2 fingers to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that was probably one of the most effective things in the game. Like that was really upsetting to watch.
Yeah.
I think uh and it's just like a very tangible kind of like result or consequence for her actions. And I don't know if like maybe you got a different feeling out of this, but I think when she chooses to let Abby live in that last fight, for me it became more obvious that this was kind of like at the end of the day it was like a power thing for her more so than just needing Abby to die. Like it was like she had been beaten like twice, and it's just
Yeah.
like in this final moment I think it's not so much her realizing the error of her ways, but more so that like she kind of realizes that her killing Abby at this point both won't bring her like this like satisfaction or this, I guess, catharsis that she needs, and also will be like at the detriment of Lev maybe.
Yeah.
um it's hard to see where her head's at, but to me it felt like a power thing at that point.
Yeah, I think part of her was satisfied that she finally won.
Yeah.
She got to kind of decide the fate of Abby.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I mean, like that's all this has been really. Like, I mean, realistically, you could say Abby and Ellie fought kind of on even terms once, right, in
Hmm.
the theater, and Ellie lost. That was really the only time because Ellie, at the beginning of the game when Joel dies, doesn't know what she's walking into, right? Gets caught off guard.
Hmm.
They fight fair and square, finger quotes, sort of, right? And
Hmm.
Abby wins, and then, um, you know, then Ellie catches Abby off guard, right? And it's sort of the full
Yeah.
circle of everything. But in this case, chooses to kind of let go.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's interesting because it's pretty clear that Ellie loses everything. Um, it's not made clear what she does. Like they do a good framing where she puts the guitar down and leaves it in the farmhouse along with all of her art,
Hmm.
and just sort of walks away. She can't play guitar anymore now with her hands the way that it are with the way that they are, and yeah, and Dina's gone. Dina left, and who knows how long it's been? Could have been anywhere between 2 months to 6 months by the time she's back at that farmhouse, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, Dina could have fully moved on by that point. So,
Yeah.
Ellie
And
kind
you're
of,
kind of left with these feelings of like what do you do at this point? Like
yeah,
you've lost like this life that you could have had with this person. You've also, I guess, addressed this big moment. It's just like what is like Ellie's story from this point? I would feel so aimless. Like I wouldn't
yeah,
know what to do with myself. There's no real reason to live in this world, right? Like that's the whole thing that Ellie brings up to Joel earlier on, is that like this is her dying for that cause, like for the Fireflies and for a possible cure and stuff, was like a reason to live in this
yeah,
world, which she kind of like doesn't have at this point
yeah,
anymore. There's nothing.
yeah. I mean, maybe she goes back to Jackson.
Hmm.
Um, maybe, yeah, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she just lives out the rest of her days on her own.
Hmm.
Um, but I think if there's one thing that this game was really successful at, it was, making you feel that kind of hollow, sort of empty feeling, after everything's done.
Hmm.
And seeing everything that happened to Ellie and Abby over the course of this game how pretty much everything's been taken away from both of them.
Mhm.
Sort of due to their own actions or reactions to their actions. Um,
Well, just like I guess giving in to your like baser instincts, like in this world where like you need to commit all these like violent acts to get revenge, in this world where like that's far more possible than like a civilized world, like doing
yeah,
all this like crazy shit. Um, and it makes me wonder, like I know that we were kind of joking about if they even like make a sequel to this,
yeah.
but do you feel like in a world where like The Last of Us 3 exists, like do they carry these characters forward and like maybe have them encounter each other at a different point, or do you see them like starting fresh with new people in this world if they were to do that? Because I don't they didn't say that this is like the last of Us game, right? Like they were just kind of like
I
they're not
mean,
making DLC.
yeah, they didn't say that. Boy, I would be I would be really shocked if they
Hmm.
chose to continue.
Yeah.
I think I think in general Naughty Dog could stand to make something else for a
Hmm.
little bit. Neither like I don't think they should, and I maybe they mentioned that they won't do this, but I don't think they should continue the Uncharted series. I think they kind of said that they weren't intending to,
Hmm.
and then I really I don't think that they should. Mm, I mean, another Last of Us game, while maybe narratively interesting because the world I think is very ripe with possibilities.
Hmm.
I don't think that it would be satisfying if it was just another one of those, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think already this game was pushing it by the end, right? Like
Hmm.
like I wanted it to be over. I just wanted to know what was going to happen. I think maybe people more charitable than I could chalk that up to how the game makes you feel, right?
Yeah.
But realistically, I think it's because the gameplay just does not sustain itself over 30 to 20 to 30 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so
The other thing for me is, um, despite this being a different thing than zombies, um, I I hate to say this, like it feels really mean, but I don't find this world that interesting. I find the characters in it really interesting.
yeah,
I find like their struggles and stuff, and this is a big thing that carried me through the parts of The Walking Dead that I liked, is just that like that idea of like, it's such a trope, but like the humans are the real monsters. Like the zombies are just sort of like they're just like a thing going on. And I think that like especially with the way that they introduce like the new infected in this and stuff, it's just that like these games are very clearly like not about learning more about this world. It's more about like these characters within it. So if they made
yeah,
another sequel, for me like personally, if they decided to like carry these characters' stories forward or whatever, they would have to investigate like a strong theme like this one with like revenge or whatever, because the world stuff, unless they made like a big change, is just like not fascinating to me. Just the way that they build it, like you don't learn enough little stuff to keep you intrigued. Like it's just this is the way things are, and it's I don't know. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, totally. I
the
mean, I
yeah.
think I mean you like to bring up Fallout a lot. It's Fallout has a setup and a universe that is thematically and like physically interesting, right?
Hmm.
Like you see shit or you hear about shit and you want to learn about it.
Hmm.
I think The Last of Us definitely lacks that because it's grounded in reality first and foremost, right? But
Hmm.
more importantly, um, you know, I mean, if the you know trek across the country in the first game and then now the few places you visit in the second game are anything to go off of, it's kind of just the same shit everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think that yeah, I mean, I hope they don't make another one only because I think these are two really solid games. I think the
Hmm.
first one, I don't know about you, but I still think the first one is maybe more special to me. just because it came out at a time that made it unique.
Yeah.
That made it very, kind of a sea change for games, right? Like a very narratively driven, very cinema-esque,
Mhm.
a game that's very character written first and story written second, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of things that make it very unique that obviously are no longer the case because it's been it's been like 8 years, right? 7 years.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's this game is a cool experience and something that I'm glad that I saw through.
Mhm.
But doesn't it doesn't feel special the way that The Last of Us 1 did, and it certainly feels like it's way too fucking long. Um
It does feel very long, and that's another whole like conversation about like value attributed to like length of a
yeah,
game. Like games, it's kind of getting into like movie territory now, or maybe it's always been there and I just didn't see it. But like people naturally just think that like games need to be a certain length to be worth what they're worth, especially as like AAA titles.
yeah,
And like for me, like I've been saying this for like a long time, especially with like horror games, but a lot of them are just too long. And
yeah,
it's not necessarily the length of the game, it's the fact that like there isn't enough interesting stuff that they have to fill those portions of the game to make it like an end to end
yeah,
enjoyable experience. So it's like why bother? Like if you have something to fill those things and you can genuinely make like a fucking like 40-hour game that is just like enjoyable the whole way, for sure, that's a really difficult feat. But there's just so much padding in horror games in general that
yeah,
the experience like short horror games, like Silent Hill 2 like takes you like 6 hours to beat or something.
yeah.
And like and it's still like a really powerful story. Like this stuff, you don't need that much padding unless you really have something interesting to tell in that time.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. And I think games are in an interesting kind of predicament because they're constantly battling the idea of value, the idea of replayability and things like that. How much can you kind of wring from this experience mechanically? And
Hmm.
in this case, the narrative definitely suffers in service of the mechanics. Um,
Hmm.
this could have been a tight, pretty compact story of maybe 15 hours, but instead it
Hmm.
was, because of the gameplay and because of the mechanics, stretched out to twice its length. Um, which gives it less oomph, less punch, I think, and
Hmm.
makes it feel more lacking overall.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I don't know. If you, I don't know. Let's just for sake of example, say that somebody came to you and said, "Hello, I have a scale. Um, I have a scale. Okay, it's called the infinite scale, right?
Yes.
Named. I think maybe we'll go into this more in a future episode, but named for Bioshock Infinite being the most mediocre game of all time. At absolute zero. Let's say that's zero, right? Average,
Yes.
average, acceptable, right?
The most mediocre
Um,
things you can think of in life fit
correct.
within the zero of the infinite scale.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Just existence itself. Um, so from -10 to +10, zero being neutral or average,
People
where
are like anybody who's listening to this is like just completely losing their mind.
I now listen. The infinite scale is a real thing that I didn't just invent. I invented it like when Bioshock Infinite came out, so like 8 years ago or 7 years ago. Okay, it's conveniently enough Troy Baker also in that game. Uh,
It was also invented when Jim Sterling gave Breath of the Wild a 7 out
yeah,
of 10.
yes, yeah. Which I mean, holy shit. But I mean, he's not wrong. Anyway, different topic for a different time. Yeah. So if you had to rate The Last of Us
Yeah.
on the infinite scale, where would you?
I mean, it is definitely not mediocre for me, especially like
All right.
considering like BioShock Infinite. This is so difficult because I genuinely think that this is a worthwhile and like not just like a good like game. More importantly, like a good sequel. I think good sequels are so hard, you know, like
Yeah.
because the best examples of sequels that people can think of, I think, tend to just be really, really well made remakes. You know, like
Yeah.
it's like the same thing done again, but like with like maybe like a little twist or whatever. But this is like so radically different from the first one, and regardless of if you like the first one more or whatever, I think that like for me, it's just such a good sequel,
Yeah.
which is really rare. I don't know. It's like maybe it's like a 5. I don't know. Like
Man.
what are you thinking?
Yeah, that's respectable. That's pretty high. I mean, I think the highest game I've ever rated on the Infinite scale is like Half-Life 2, and that's like a 6.
Okay.
Or like a 6 or a 7. I can't remember now. I need to refer back to the document. But
Not any of the episodes, right? You're talking just Half-Life
Half-Life
2.
2. Yeah, Half-Life
Okay.
2 itself. So, I
Okay.
don't know, man. Yeah.
Yeah, we need spit out like another game that you've something
Oh,
else notable from the
Jesus.
Infinite scale. I need to
Should I give something I played like recently, or maybe something that you also have played for like context? You just
something that
like,
you've
give me
spoken to me a lot about, so
just
that like when you say this number, I'll be like, okay, that makes sense
like
based on what you
give me
said.
a game. Give me a game.
Okay. Okay. Disco Elysium.
Holy shit. Oh
Wait,
god.
no. I have a better one.
Okay, all right.
Outer Wilds.
Outer
Outer
Wilds. Okay, Outer Wilds on the
Actually,
Infinite.
give me both. I want both.
Oh boy. Okay. Wow, I haven't even thought about this. That's how like intensely those games affected me. I did they were so good they transcended the scale. No. I just didn't really think about it. So Disco Elysium is one of my favorite games I've played in recent fucking memory. That game to me, if Half-Life 2 is like I'm going to say a 6. If Half-Life 2 is like a 6, then Disco Elysium is like a 5. Like
And 10 is like, just to clarify, 10 is like perfect,
10
right?
10 is like unachievable in my mind. I don't know,
Yeah.
it shouldn't even exist.
Yeah, you don't see it until you have died and you were at the pearly gates.
If something achieves a 10, then the scale needs to be reconfigured. Is the way I'm looking at it.
Then we need to wipe the whole.
Yeah, we gotta wipe the whole fucking list.
Gotta start from zero
over
again.
Fucking nuke it from orbit, man.
And this will be when the next BioShock sequel comes out.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, Disco Elysium is probably like a 5 because I think that game is absolutely incredible. Outer Wilds would be like a 3. I that game makes me feel a lot of things, and I think it accomplishes exactly what it's trying to achieve. But in terms of like an enjoyable gameplay experience, I think there are certain parts of that game that drag you towards its conclusion in a way that sort of make you put up with maybe just playing the game. Like you just kind of want to see what's happening more than you're enjoying like actually mechanically interacting with things. But that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for me, this is probably the problem and why I maybe need to rethink like how I actually apply things with the scale. But for me, I've never had a problem with like the.
Shut up.
So wait, all right, hold on. All right, 7 out of 10 is not bad. To me,
Yeah,
6 out of 10 is not bad.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's like 1 to 10, 5 is the middle of the road. 5 is mediocre. 5 is also 0 for the scale.
Yeah.
So in that context, I would probably rate Last of Us higher. Well, no, because 0 is like the middle portion. So 5 is actually appropriate for me. But in a traditional rating, like I would say Last of Us 2 is probably a 7 or an 8. Like it's not like it's definitely not bad. It's definitely not mediocre, but it's not like life changing. It's going to be below a lot of things for me.
So the reason the infinite scale even exists, and I love how we're explaining this at the end of this episode, the reason the infinite scale even exists is because we felt a lot of people had preconceived notions about what a 1 to 10 scale was. So like
it's bizarre to me. It's bizarre.
Taking like I wanted to completely eliminate those notions and have people just start putting shit on a new scale, because honestly, like I mean, I fucking joke. Like, the infinite scale is obviously totally stupid, but to me, it's easy because it's actually easier to rate things because there are no like preconceptions about what a number on the infinite scale is. You're just rating it in relation to other things, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, which has
And
its own
yeah,
it has its own flaws, but
yeah,
we'll get into
it's
that another
just
time.
for sure. Yeah, I don't know. Wait, so that I do have another question though. So wait, what was BioShock Infinite on the traditional rating for you then? I would imagine it would be a 5, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So okay. So yes, Last of Us 2 is better than average, not perfect, but just it's good. You can play it
Yeah.
and have a good
So
time.
it's like a 2 or a 3 on the infinite scale, which is I think exactly what I would rate it. Like a 2 seems
Sure.
right. It's
Yeah.
it's got some problems. It's got some problems. Overall, I am happy that I experienced it. I think the narrative is good. As a game, I think it suffers in service of the narrative and in service of the message, but
Mhm.
I think it's a quality product. I mean, you'll fucking for goddamn sure get your money's worth because it's 3 bajillion years long. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, it. I mean, yeah, I think people who really hate this game are weird. People who really love this game are weird. Um,
Mhm.
it's a good game. It exists. That's it.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I think one thing that I really get out of this is like Naughty Dog is like the undisputed champion of getting shit on the internet for having games where you just mindlessly like kill people that like I think like with like Uncharted, like you probably feel very differently about this as like a fan, and there's probably a lot you have to say about this, but like the internet feels at least like Uncharted games are you just sort of being this like white dude killing a bunch of people in like different countries and shit.
Yeah,
And it's really interesting that like that this game is trying to tackle the notion of like presenting violence differently regardless of how effective it is, and it makes me wonder if this is like just a thing that they want with The Last of Us, or if this is something that they want to like more directly try to address in their games, and maybe they do feel somewhat self-conscious about, or at least like aware of at this point.
sure. Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it probably is a direct opposition. Like, ludonarrative dissonance is, of course, the thing you're referring to, where Nathan Drake is like a happy-go-lucky idiot. Not idiot, but like he's a lovable oaf who
Yeah.
kind of bungles his way through murdering like 3,000 people in a game. And no one ever really comments on how his body count is like higher than some war criminals, right? Um, like I think that's kind of, and that was a popular thing. That was a big thing with BioShock Infinite as well, and other games around that time is like, GTA 4, like characters that express regret or nothing about how they treat like the narrative character doesn't align with the gameplay character, right?
Mhm.
This is the exact opposite of that. No more issues with
Yeah.
that. Like these characters have all the reasons in the world to have a huge body count and take pride in it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like we're not going to change what you are going to expect out of an action game
Yeah.
as a player. We're just going to give you characters that it fits more with. It's kind of like the Trevor thing with GTA 5 where it's like regardless of how you feel about the other characters' motivations to do these like horrible things, it's like of course like Trevor is like meant to be like the player playing that game. Like
Yeah.
he very much so has the mindset that he like none of this shit matters. Like this is the person playing GTA,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
So you have all these different games kind of trying to tackle this in different weird ways.
totally. He just like mindlessly kills people, right? And just like how people who played like older GTA games treated it.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so yeah, I think The Last of Us 2 could be a direct response from Naughty Dog. Like, hey, you want to get rid of the idea of ludonarrative dissonance? Well, we wrote a story where two characters are extremely invested in killing a lot of people. Um,
Hmm.
but
Just
you
like
know,
a movie.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, you have any closing thoughts? Anything you wanted to bring up, or anything we didn't
Hmm.
cover?
I don't know. Do you?
I don't think so. I think we kind of got it. Yeah, I mean the soundtrack is of course really good.
They're gonna make a PS5 version too, right? Like
I don't.
didn't they say they're gonna have like a version for that or something?
I think there's going to be probably an update that makes this game run on the PS5, and it might look a little better. But
And you
who
won't
knows?
hear the fans
Yeah,
basically dying on your PS4.
yeah. The PS4 really was being pushed to its limit with this game. I don't think it handled it all that well. So, um, yeah, that's a pretty yeah. But anyway, all right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. Um, yeah, thanks as always for listening. Uh, this has been super fun. I'm excited. I've been excited to talk about this for a while. I think that's why we kind of stopped ourselves for recording for a couple weeks, because we wanted to see this through and kind of have the whole picture before we talked about it again. Because in the first episode, we were clearly just shooting in the dark about what we thought was going to happen. I'd like to go back and listen to that now to see how correct we were in some stuff. But
For sure.
yeah. Anyway, so this has been the Infinite Scale. I forgot to introduce us. I am William Chandler, and with me is Sean Petersohn. And thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
All
Later.
right, bye.